you don't need them anymore. And it's not a problem of arming them because there's such a proliferation of small arms, it costs nothing to arm them. And it's not a problem of keeping them indoctrinated because there's drugs up the yin-yang. And so they've got a weapon system that is total, that is complete, that can cover every base of a low technology conflict, a low intensity conflict, something that doesn't grab necessarily the headlines. And they can make them the primary tool. Now I'm going to go through fast. These are all available anyways to you. These are the actions. They do everything that the military, what you need to do. And they do also all the support functions that I was describing earlier on in all these conflicts. And so can we, in fact, ignore all that's going out there? Can we ignore all those screams that are out there of attempting to resolve this problem? There's been an enormous amount of paperwork done in order to bring in the optional protocol and to, in fact, influence international conventions. But the question is there's still hundreds of thousands of them being recruited and killed and abused every day. And the impact of that on those children is, of course, massive. And they are the future of their countries. Those who can survive this extraordinary situation. And so, in a time of which we're prepared to use children, in a time where the whole concept of humanity, humanitarian law, the law of armed conflict, has been fiddled with, and that we see that extremism is playing by none of these rules. They follow none of these rules. Taking a 14-year-old girl who has a certain deficiency and strapping her full of bombs, putting her in a bus, and then letting the bus fill up with your own people, and then remotely blowing up the bus and her, is not playing by any of the rules in order to use that to be an example against the other force and blame it on the other force. And so the corporal who's standing protecting a site where people have sought protection, the moderates, as they're trying to reorganize in the country of conflict. And as he's there on the barrier sort of doing patrol, and up ahead there's about 200 meters, there's a girl running towards him. And she looks pregnant. He's there. And so the corporal, who's 19, 20, 21, looking at that, he's saying, is that a pregnant girl seeking protection? Because often if they're outside those boundaries, they get raped and abused. Or is she a suicide bomber? If he thinks she's a suicide bomber and shoots her and she's was an innocent girl, how does that help establish an atmosphere of security, that we're there to protect them, we're there to assist them in rebuilding their nation, reconstituting themselves? What if he doesn't shoot her? And she does come in, and she's remotely blown up, and kills a whole bunch of people he's supposed to be protecting, and some of his buddies, who come back here in body bags. Then what does the soldier think? How do you react to that? How, in fact, do you react that throughout the world, the only doctrine that military have when they face child soldiers is the law of self-defense and your mandate to protect? And so the sergeant who was in a village that all of a sudden had a bunch of people under protection, and the village came under attack by about 30 boys, 9, 10, 12, 14, 16. And as he's reading from that, from the other side, about 20 girls, some of them pregnant, same ages, and they're human shields behind which other boys and girls are shooting at the sergeant who's patrolling the people he's protecting. What does the sergeant do? Do you kill children who kill? Under duress, taken away, drugged up, indoctrinated? Is that the only tactical tool that we've been able to invent over the last 20 years of facing child soldiers, is actually killing them? In fact, the US Marine Corps is the only one who ever wrote anything. They said, try to avoid any confrontation with them. Well, when the whole of the force on the other side are children with adults behind them, and they're attacking and shooting at the people you're protecting, it gets a little difficult to avoid it. And so that's where it's at. We got all kinds of people working on rehabilitating and reintegrating them after the fact, after you've been able to pull them out. The Child Soldier Initiative and my research and the Zero Force, that's the advocacy, youth advocacy wing of it, is looking at how to neutralize them as a weapons system. And I've made all kinds of people very nervous by calling children armed and called child soldiers officially. That's been recognized, but to be calling them a weapons system, the most sophisticated low technology weapon system from end to end, from the actual operational killing all the way through to the logistics and even meeting the sexual needs of the commanders. That's what it is, and that's what we're facing. And so the NGO world is focused massively on trying to get them out and in fact trying to hopefully rehabilitate, reintegrate. And I believe the depth of that whole NGO commitment is going to one day coalesce and become the voice of humanity and will influence public opinion and policy. The NGO world is the voice of the world. It is sans frontières. It is there. Join it. Engage in it. Create your own. These guys did. He came in my office one day and he said, "We need some money." And I said, "Who are you clowns?" Because they had the big red noses on. He said, and they were from Montreal. I thought it was Chalet or something. He said, "That's right, we're Clowns Without Borders." What do? We go into refugee camps, displaced camps, countries in conflict, and we teach children games. We teach children how to laugh. We teach them how to survive in the horrors they're in. And so, as Canada being part of Middle Powers, what are we going to do? What is that future of this country? When we are overtly aware of the pecking order of humanity that we created, of letting overtly children being massively used as the basis of conflict, what are we going to do about it? Well, I'm going to run fast, if I may, because I know time is of the essence. I am going to be introducing legislation that doesn't even exist in Canada yet in regards to child soldiers. We signed the convention in 2000. Canada led with the United States the optional protocol on child rights for the stop of use of children as child soldiers, and yet we have not put any of that into our legislation. And so in the winter coming, I'm going to be introducing in the Senate legislation to change those laws to protect children. If a young, unaccompanied youth in a country comes up to a refugee staff person from our country, and the staff person asks him, "Do you know what an AK-47 is? Do you know how it works? Have you ever been in a sort of group that's had to fight?" And if any of those responses are yes, that kid doesn't come into Canada. Child soldiers are not allowed to come into Canada. And we have a lot of them here living under the fear that one day they're found out of having been ex-child soldiers. So the research, I had to do it overseas, and did it mostly in Ghana, in regards to child soldiers, and attempting to get Canada to retake and implement what it said. So getting action, because inaction is an action. When Canada, when the rest of the world decided not to come to Rwanda, that was an action. That was a decision. It wasn't, "Oh, geez, we didn't know about it." No. It was on all the media. It was a decision not to go in. And so we believe that we can create a whole new way of solving it, this particular problem, by integrating the police, the military, the NGOs, the agencies, the diplomats, and the nation builders in finding solutions that we can stop the use of children by neutralizing them without having to kill them. I mean, even the idea of using non-lethal weapons would be some commencement. And so that's what we're working towards in our project. And that's what the Child Soldier Initiative, based out of Dalhousie now, is doing. And we will achieve it. Might take 40 years, but that's okay. That's okay. As long as we attrit what's going on there. As long as we wear it down. As long as we bring those adults to justice in front of the International Court, which is starting. As long as we stop that impunity by the adults and by the governments in what they're doing. That's how we're going to stop it. And that's how we're going to make those countries less vulnerable to conflict. Because if you take away the weapon, well, it makes it more difficult for the country to decide. And I won't go through all that, except to say we want not only to do the technical stuff, and we've had teams, I got another team going into the Congo, and I'm going back in January, where we're doing research in conflict zones, where there's UN forces and not, trying to figure out all these ways of stopping their recruitment and their use by these adults, so that then you don't have to reintegrate because you're not going to have them. And so as we're working towards that, we felt that we had to engage in implementing the policies that are there, but people don't want to touch on, like our own legislation and so on. And so we thought that the peers of these kids would be an extraordinary tool, particularly with this revolution in communication, social communications, of being able to be advocates, to be activists, and to stop adults using their peers in those countries as weapons of war. So we wanted to mobilize 25,000 Canadians. And then we're going to move to 250,000. We want a 1-for-1 ratio for the children being used right now in conflict. And ultimately, to eradicate it, we're going to use a military doctrine called overwhelming force. You want to stop a complete force from existing, you got to go in with about 10-to-1 ratio. And so ultimately, Zero Force is going to try to recruit 2.5 million youths around the world to mobilize and become activists in influencing public opinion, policies, to stop arming and using, abusing and destroying the youth, their peers, by making them weapons of war. Thank you very much.